Motorsports today. I'm tuning a brand new STI 2019. This thing has 6,000 miles on it. Circuit just installed a DW 300 liter per hour fuel pump. They installed a GrimmSpeed 3-port electronic boost control solenoid, and they installed an Invidia catless downpipe. Other than that, it's bone stock. We got stock intake, stock catback, stock intercooler, stock turbos, stock injectors. So if you want to know what a brand new STI with just a catted downpipe can make, and a 3-port electronic boost control solenoid, stay tuned. Alright, so I've got the base calibration loaded up. This is my dashboard, the things I basically like to look at while I'm tuning. This is a base setup, so sometimes I'll add some throughout the tune, sometimes I'll remove some throughout the tune, and because I want to see different things. We got air-to-fuel correction and air-to-fuel learning up top. That's your short-term and long-term fuel trims. This is your air-to-fuel sensor ratio, accelerator position, which I don't really need to see live, but is perfect for logs. Boost target relative pressure, calculated load, coolant temp, dynamic advance multiplier, which I'll explain later how dynamic advance on a Subaru works with ignition timing, engine speed, feedback and fine knock learning, which is what you want to keep your eyes on for knock, ignition timing, intake temp pre-turbo, manifold relative pressure to see how much boost we're actually making, mass airflow grams per second, mass airflow voltage. When you're doing MAF scaling, what you're doing is telling the computer how many grams per second of air is coming in per volt of mass airflow. So that's how that works. So that's one of the first things we're going to be doing, is doing some MAF scaling. That's actually the table I have up right here. We got wastegate duty and injector duty cycle. With stock injectors, you really want to log injector duty cycle with wide open throttle stuff and make sure you're not pushing the injectors past where they can, past what they can do. So the first thing I'm doing now is doing some MAF scaling. So what we're doing is looking at the fuel trims here. As you can see, it's adding 3.9% on the short term, but pulling 1.5% on the long term. So that means it's adding about 1.5%. I'll keep my eye on that. It was perfect a minute ago, so it kind of will fluctuate a little bit. Really, you want it under like 5%. I usually shoot for about 2 or 3%, especially cruising and at idle. But that's going to be the first thing we're going to do, is we're going to drive around and do a little bit of MAF scaling. I like to do that off the dyno, saves us dyno time. So I'll drive around on the street and calibrate the cruising stuff for a few minutes. Once that's good, I'll do a couple pulls just to make sure my wide open throttle stuff is at least in the right ballpark. I'm going to do all the wide open throttle stuff on the dyno, but I want to make sure it's at least close. And then we'll start adding boost and making sure she's good. Alright, so I got the MAF scaling pretty well calibrated. You can see it's about 3% if you add the two together right now. So it's good enough for now. I'll keep continuing to mess with it as we go on through the day, tuning it. But I'm sitting here at the dyno waiting. We just got to move a few cars around so we can get this thing on the dyno. I'll check a couple things on it before I start doing some pulls, and then we'll start doing some pulls. It's maxing out boost-wise. The couple pulls I did on the street before, it maxed out boost-wise at about 15.5, 16 pounds. We're shooting at about 19, tapering to 14.5, 15 at redline. So I'm going to leave it around 15, 16 for now. Do a few pulls, see where the air-to-fuel ratio's at, make sure it's not pulling any timing, and look at the turbo dynamics, make sure that the boost curve is nice and flat so we can get that torque curve nice and flat, and keep that horsepower curve increasing as much as possible up to redline. This turbo is not super efficient above, I'd say 5,800, 6,000 RPM. So above 6,000 RPM, especially with it mostly stock, it's going to be hard to keep that horsepower going up. It's going to start to fall off close to 6,000 RPM, and then it'll just continue to decrease. So that's why we're not going to raise the rev limit. We're going to leave the factory rev limiter of about 7,200, 7 grand, and that's it. Let's see what it does. strapped down to the dyno and ready to go. We've got a wideband in that I'm monitoring from the inside, and there's also a wideband in the back on this that is plugged into the dyno, so we can see the AFR with the graphs as well. Alright, I just did a baseline pull. This was it hit about 16.8, 17 PSI. It made 266 and 311. So that did taper off to about 13 PSI, 14 PSI maybe up top. So need to add some more wastegate duty up top, add a little bit of timing up top, clean it up, add more boost the whole way through it. But those are some really nice curves, super smooth and everything for a base map and a first pull. Alright, so second pull we did 273 and 319. I bumped up the wastegate duty like 6 to 8% roughly. It still only made 17.6 pounds. You can see it might be hard to tell, but the air to fuel ratio is a little rich through here. It's running like 10s, low 10s. I'm shooting for like 11.2-ish. So I need to pull a little bit of fuel. It's running a little bit of rich. That'll help us with some power. And I need to keep adding some wastegate duty, but it's looking pretty good so far. Alright, so I pulled a little bit of map scaling. It was about 4 volts and up where it was running a little rich. So I pulled like 4 or 5% roughly. You don't want to overdo it. I also added about 6% on the wastegate duty the whole way through the wide open throttle because we need more boost. So let's see what she does. Look through this for a minute. What did we do? About exactly the same. It made like, I think 3 less horsepower is what I'm seeing, and exactly the same torque. So let's see what's going on. Okay, so one of the reasons it didn't make more power is because up top over here in the 2.0 to 2.3 calculated load area, about 6,000 RPM and up, it pulled about 1.5 degrees. It wasn't too bad, you know, it didn't drop the dynamic advance or anything, so it wasn't harsh knock, but it did pull 1 degree or so of timing, which was just enough to keep it from making more power. So it cleaned up some timing a little bit over here. It was the first time we hit that RPM and calculated load area, so that's why we do it in steps, because if you end up doing a base pull and it goes like this and everything's good, and then you throw a bunch of boost at it, and the next pull you do goes like this over here, you didn't get to see any of this stuff in the mid-range there, and you don't know if that's actually okay for different part throttle ranges or whatever. So that's why I like to do it in steps. So it'll go like that, and then like that, and then like that, and then like that, and then like that. So that way I know it's good the whole way through. So pulled a little bit of timing up top, nothing crazy, like 3/4 degree, 1 degree in a couple spots, and that's it. Let's see what it does. With Cobb, you can do a lot of stuff live. It's one of the things that's great about Cobb, but still every few changes I make, I'll flash and make it permanent just to make sure it's doing what we're telling it to do. So just doing another flash, and we'll do some more pulls, and honestly, this thing doesn't have too much more in it. This Dynocom reads a few percent lower than most of the other dynos in the area as well. So it's making a little bit, it would make a little bit more on any other dyno in the area. But let's see. made a lot more power on that pull. It just did 305 and 355. The curves are significantly better. Let me get rid of this one. There we go. We can see a little bit more clearly. Super smooth. A little bit more flat up top. We'll see if we can make a little bit more up here, although it's not really likely, to be honest with you. The turbo seems like it's done all it can with the stock exhaust. AFR is perfect though. A couple points rich up top. I might pull a percent or two above 6,000 RPM, but other than that, it's pretty much perfect. I'm gonna look through the log, see if there's a couple other things I can clean up, but we're about maxed on power, to be honest with you. So the logs looked pretty good. The only thing is above about 5,000 RPM, it's not quite making as much boost as we would like. So I'm just gonna go and add a few percent. And let's go from there. So I think we're maxed. It doesn't want to make any more boost up top with the stock catback and everything. The last two pulls it did 305 and 355 and 306 and 352. So even in this Florida heat, it's staying pretty consistent. Curves are staying pretty flat. AFR is 11.2 to 11.0 the whole way across, right where we want it. So this thing's done. Just gonna street test it on the way back to the shop, and customer will come pick it up later, and that's it. So we're in the STI. It's all done. We're unstrapped from the dyno. Just gotta drive it back and make sure she's good off the dyno. So I got my laptop here. I'll keep my eye on a few things while we're driving, and also I'll try to get a couple logs with a couple pulls on the street and just make sure we're good. Fueling's still within about 2%, so ready to send it. Quiet. This thing with the stock catback and a catted downpipe, factory headers, everything. It's a very, very quiet car. So I mean, if you're looking for extra horsepower, but you don't want to do a full exhaust and you don't want to do all these modifications and you want your car to stay reliable, this car just has a 3-port boost control solenoid, a catted downpipe, and a fuel pump, which may have helped us. I'm not sure if it really helped us too much because we didn't max out the injectors. I'm sure it's a lot less stress on this pump than there would be on a stock pump, but you could get away with just an electronic boost control solenoid and a catted downpipe and make these same numbers. The car just did 305 and 355 and 306 and 352 on the last two pulls, so that's a lot of power for a stock car with a catted downpipe, an aftermarket catted downpipe, and a boost control solenoid. The boost control solenoid won't actually make you more power, it'll just help you control boost a little bit better, essentially. So I'm very pleased with this car. It came out very, very good, so the customer will be pleased too. And that's what matters. We're almost back to circuit. Car feels good, hasn't done anything weird on the drive back. I like to test everything on the way back to the shop because cars will always drive a little bit different on the dyno than they do on the street. It was making about a half a pound more boost up in 4th gear, so I pulled about 2%, nothing crazy on the wastegate duty, and we're good now. Hey, so I'm actually home now, and I started editing the video, and I realized while I was editing the video I didn't explain how dynamic advance works like I said I was going to, so I'm just going to throw that in real quick. Dynamic advance, when I was logging it, if you noticed, it was 1.0 most of the time. That's used as a multiplier, and that's usually what a tuned Subaru starts at. It'll start at 1.0, and you want it to stay at 1.0 theoretically. If it drops below 1.0, then that means it's seeing knock that the engine thinks, or that the ECU thinks could be harmful to the engine, so it will drop that multiplier number. Now, how that works is you have a base ignition timing table, okay? So let's just say this is 40 degrees, which it's not exactly, but let's just say it's 40 degrees, and this is 30 and 26, and this is 12, 15, whatever over here, okay? So how that works is, this is just a base ignition timing table. It's not necessarily going to run just these values. It's got all these compensations and all these other things that it takes, that the ECU takes into account. You've got ignition compensation for coolant temp. You've got ignition compensation for intake air temp, for a lot of different things. So, but how the dynamic advance works is, so you've got this base ignition timing table, and then you've got the dynamic advance max table. So this I have to about 6 degrees roughly, through where it's activated. Where it's not, it's zeros. So at 1.0 calculated load and above, you'll have these dynamic advance values. And when it's 1.0, it multiplies this table and then adds that to the base ignition timing table. So if your dynamic advance is 1.0, then it will add this whole 5 or 6 degrees, whatever value is in here, on top of the base ignition timing table. Now again, this is only 1.0 calculated load and above, and you can change that to come in sooner. You can tune it however you want. You can make this 10 degrees and then run the base ignition timing table a lot lower. You can do whatever you want, but I'm just explaining how that works. So then if your dynamic advance multiplier drops to 0.7 because it saw some knock, it's going to multiply this table by 70% and add that number to your base ignition timing table. If it drops to 0.5, it will cut this in half and add that to your primary ignition timing table. So that's how dynamic advance works. Again, theoretically in a Subaru, you want it to be 1.0 the whole time. And that's it.